In the height of the Roman Empire, a man who was supposed to be a loyal ally, trained in Roman tactics, orchestrated one of the greatest military disasters in history. Arminius, a trusted officer in Rome's eyes, used all his strategic knowledge to betray those who had raised him. But how did a mere ally manage to destroy 3 Roman legions in a single ambush? You might think that defeats of the legions were rare, but what if I told you that, in this betrayal, Rome saw its blind trust turn into its greatest weakness? Arminius, the man the empire relied on, flipped the script by planning the perfect attack, taking advantage of the terrain, the weather, and, above all, his familiarity with the Roman army. Get ready to explore the mind of the man who brought down 3 legions of Rome with impeccable strategy. What you're about to see will reveal the secrets behind the betrayal that shook the empire and the consequences that Rome could never forget. Arminius, born among the treacherous, grew up amidst tensions between Germanic tribes and the expansion of the Roman Empire. As part of a diplomatic agreement, he was taken to Rome at a young age, not as a prisoner, but as an honorary hostage, a common practice to secure the loyalty of barbarian leaders. In Rome, he was educated in the language, culture, and, most importantly, Roman military tactics, a training that deeply shaped him. Arminius became more than just a hostage. He was incorporated into the Roman army, earning the trust of his superiors and the status of a knight. To the Romans, Arminius appeared fully assimilated. He served with distinction in military campaigns, demonstrating exceptional tactical skills and a profound understanding of Roman military operations. He was promoted to officer and fought alongside his supposed allies, gaining insight into the power and structure of the empire from the inside. However, internally, the young German never forgot his roots. Although Rome had trained him, he was not Roman at heart. With each battle, each victory alongside the Romans, his ambition to free his people from the oppressive shadow of the empire grew. Direct contact with the Roman legions gave Arminius valuable strategic insight. He understood how the Romans thought, how they planned, and, most importantly, how they underestimated their enemies. This underestimation would be key to his future betrayal. Arminius realized that the Romans, with all their grandeur, had a blind spot. They believed that the superiority of their tactics and organization was unbeatable. Rome's confidence, however, would be its downfall, and Arminius began to slowly construct his betrayal, waiting for the perfect moment. While maintaining his disguise as a loyal ally, Arminius returned to Germania, masking his intentions to betray the empire. He was welcomed as a hero by both the Romans and the local tribal chiefs, further strengthening his strategic position. With privileged access to Roman troops, he knew that the time for rebellion was near. But unlike other barbarian uprisings that had failed due to disorganization, Arminius planned something different. He would use the Roman military manual against them. Arminius began to prepare the ground for the greatest ambush in Roman history. He secretly gathered the Germanic tribal leaders, uniting rival factions with the promise of an unimaginable victory against Rome. The leaders, initially reluctant, were convinced by the vision of an ally so close to Roman power. With Roman confidence on one side and Germanic loyalty on the other, Arminius was ready to execute his plan, a betrayal that would go down in history. Arminius's genius lay in his deep understanding of Roman military tactics, from the formation of the legions to the logistics behind troop movements. He knew that the Romans were disciplined but heavily relied on coordination and effective communication among their commanders. In Arminius's view, Rome's biggest mistake was underestimating the Germanic terrain. The dense Teutoburg Forest provided a hostile environment for the legion's tight formation and would be the ideal location for the ambush. Arminius convinced the Romans that the threat from local tribes was under control, suggesting that they could confidently traverse the region. The Roman governor Publius Quinctilius Varus, unsuspecting, took Arminius's word as truth, a decision that would cost him dearly. The terrain Arminius chose was perfect, a narrow passage surrounded by hills and thick vegetation, where the organized formation of the legions would be impossible to maintain. He knew that once the legions lost their cohesion, they would become vulnerable to quick and deadly attacks. Using his knowledge of Roman modus operandi, Arminius planned the ambush to coincide with a long march of the legions. The Roman troops were tired, confident that no significant danger awaited them. As they moved away from the areas controlled by Rome and entered the Germanic forest, they were literally walking into the perfect trap. Arminius calculated that fatigue and the Romans' overconfidence would be their greatest enemies, and he was right. The topography made defensive formation difficult, and the typical rain in the region only added to the chaos. At the right moment, Arminius's Germanic warriors attacked with ferocity, leveraging their knowledge of the terrain. The Roman army, accustomed to open-field combat, was ill-prepared to fight in such a claustrophobic environment. Without proper communication between divisions and morale plummeting with each passing minute, the legions began to disintegrate under the pressure of the relentless assault. Arminius, the man trained by the Romans themselves, was now on the other side, leading a force that used effective guerrilla tactics against a war machine that relied on organization and discipline. The trust the Romans placed in Arminius was their fatal error. His intimate knowledge of the Roman army allowed him to anticipate every move, every reaction. Arminius's plan was executed with brutal precision, and the Romans, caught off guard and unable to respond in an organized manner, succumbed to chaos. Arminius, once seen as an ally, had become Rome's worst nightmare, turning the lessons he had learned into a devastating weapon against his own masters. The Teutoburg ambush was one of the most well-planned events in ancient military history, and much of its success was due to the terrain chosen by Arminius. The Teutoburg Forest, with its steep hills and narrow paths, was a logistical nightmare for any marching army, especially for the Roman legions, who were used to more open terrains where they could utilize their cohesive and disciplined formations. Arminius knew that once the legions found themselves confined to these passages, they would lose their ability to maneuver in large groups, becoming easy targets for quick and devastating attacks. The weather conditions also played a crucial role. The constant rain and muddy ground not only slowed the advance of the Roman troops, but also contributed to the demoralization of the army. Arminius, who knew every detail of the environment, used these conditions to his advantage, positioning his warriors at strategic points along the route, hidden by dense vegetation. So, when the Romans were attacked, they were trapped in a natural labyrinth where even their most powerful weapons, like shields and swords, struggled to function properly. Unlike large battles in open fields, where the Romans' numerical strength and tactical discipline prevailed, the Teutoburg Forest favored close combat and guerrilla warfare. Arminius exploited the dispersion of the Roman troops to his advantage. Attacks came from all directions, unpredictably, and instead of engaging directly, the Germanic warriors struck and quickly retreated, maintaining confusion and panic among the Romans. It was as if the very terrain was fighting alongside the Germans. The very formation of the legions, an extremely rigid and organized setup, was turned against the Romans. The marching columns, long and vulnerable, became easy targets as the troops were stretched thin by the terrain. With no space to reorganize their forces, the Roman soldiers began to fight for their own lives, unable to follow the orders coming from their superiors, who were also dispersed or dead. The discipline that had so often secured victory for Rome was shattered by their inability to cope with the unexpected. Arminius didn't need a larger or better-armed army to win. His victory was the result of a superior understanding of the terrain and the psychological nature of his enemies. He knew that once chaos set in, the Roman war machine would collapse. And that's exactly what happened. Rome, accustomed to winning through brute force and discipline, found its greatest challenge in the skill of a man who turned the natural environment and guerrilla tactics into a deadly weapon. As the ambush continued, it became clear that the three legions under Publius Verus's command were on the brink of total collapse. With ineffective communication among the different divisions of the army and morale devastated by the relentless ambush, the organization and cohesion that typically defined Roman power disintegrated. Arminius and his warriors kept attacking without giving the Romans time to regroup. Each soldier that fell, each commander that died, further fueled the panic spreading rapidly through the ranks. Verus, who who had until then blindly trusted his supposed Germanic ally, realized too late that he had been deceived. The three legions, totaling around 20,000 soldiers, were being massacred in what would become one of the greatest military disasters in Roman history. With no space to maneuver, no strategy applicable in such a hostile environment, and the rain making the terrain increasingly treacherous, the Romans fell one by one, unable to escape the trap that Arminius had orchestrated. The Germanic warriors, outnumbered and less equipped, used the very strength of the Roman army against them. When the Romans attempted to react in groups, they were quickly isolated and eliminated. The shield formation, which normally offered protection against frontal attacks, became useless in terrain where the Germans could strike from the flanks and from the hills above. Arminius showed no mercy, knowing that victory depended on maintaining chaos and constant pressure on the legions. Varus, witnessing the destruction of his forces and with no hope of escape, committed suicide on the battlefield. His death was symbolic of the fate of the entire Roman campaign in that region. The collapse of the three legions was not only physical, but also psychological. The Romans, used to being the invincible conquerors, were reduced to a demoralized force, without leadership, cohesion, or any chance of victory. The massacre lasted 3 days, and by the end, almost no Roman soldiers had survived to tell the tale. News of the destruction of Varus's legions reached Rome as a profound shock. Never before had the empire suffered such a complete and humiliating defeat at the hands of a group considered inferior in military power. The loss of the three legions would not only be a blow to the ranks of the Roman army, but also to the confidence of an empire that was beginning to realize that its expansion into Germanic territory might have encountered an insurmountable obstacle.